Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this tutorial, I want to explore a tool called Osquery, how we can install it, and how we can get started running some basic commands with Osquery. So stay tuned and we'll jump into it. So what is Osquery? Now, Osquery is a service that runs on a wide range of operating systems from all Linux distributions, Mac OS, Windows, and allows us to interact with our operating system as a relational database. So it allows us to write SQL queries that explore our operating system. Right, so SQL syntax, once you're kind of familiar with the basics, is pretty easy to understand. And so what we can do is write SQL-like statements to explore our operating system. So we can explore processes that are running, users that are logged in, open network connections, browser plugins, and really anything that is stored by the operating system. This gives us far richer details than just collecting like standard log files, right? So where we use our Wazoo agent to bundle up and send us log files, and yes, the Wazoo agent is also gathering network processes, file changes, user logins, and etc. But with Osquery, we can just get richer details around what's going on our server, and we can get much more insight in terms of security, and even from a operations perspective, a lot more insight into performance as well. So we could easily run a query that details out what service is hogging a lot of memory or a lot of CPU, right? And we could quickly gather that info and then take appropriate actions depending on what's detailed back to us. But enough talk, I want to actually go ahead and jump into it. So again, in the repo that we have here, we have a demos repo, and then you can select the Osquery one. And once my browser stops loading, we can jump into the installation commands that I have made for you guys to just follow along with and can copy and paste. So I have a CentOS box here. I have commands for Red Hat, CentOS, Fedora, as well as Debian and Ubuntu, and as well as a link to the Windows MSI file as well. So you can install and follow along on a Windows server as well. So let me throw this off to the side here. And all right. And I've just already navigated into my op directory here, but we will run a curl out to get the repo, and then run our config manager and add the repo. Go ahead and enable it, and then we will run a yum install Osquery. And now what we can do is interact with Osquery using the CLI. So if I just go ahead and paste this command in here, Osquery, let me kind of make this a little bigger for you guys. There we go there. And actually, let me exit out and I will clear this and run Osquery again. Actually, it may fail because it's still trying to run in the background, which it looks like it is. So if you run into that issue, just run a ps-aux and grep for Osquery, and yep, sure enough, it's already running here. So I can just kill these process IDs with the kill command, kill-9 1488 and then 1492. If I list out my processes again, I see it's gone. And now I can run that command again, and we are back into interacting with Osquery's CLI. And so as you can see, we've now pivoted into using this virtual database, and you should see your Osquery tag here. And now we can start to run some commands. Ignore this post install stuff for now. I'll touch on that at the end of this video. But I've also listed out some commands that to help get you guys started and kind of get you guys familiar with the syntax that we can use to bed out these commands, and kind of some commands that I think are useful from a security perspective. And I also detail kind of what the commands are doing. So this first one here will list processes running without a binary on disk. So a common tactic that hackers and malware implement is to run a process on a server without actually having a binary on disk. So the process will run in memory, right? But if I were to jump on the server, or maybe I'm using Wazoo to look at files that have been added to a server, right? Well, common technique that attackers implement is to have malware run within memory without actually storing any binary on disk, right? So that means, if I were to go into like cd opt/hacker, I wouldn't see, malware.exe, but the binary would still be running as a process within memory. So even though it doesn't look apparent that, I don't see a malware.exe, oh, so I must not be compromised, that may not be the case. The binary may still be running within memory, and therefore, if you were solely relying on, listing out files that have been added to a server as your total analysis to find out if a server was compromised, you would miss that because the binary is actually running within memory. And I don't care about WinZip. I should probably just uninstall that. So yeah, so if I copy this command, and it's easy as just copying and pasting. So I shouldn't have anything here, and yeah, as a result, I don't. So what we're saying is select the name, path, and process ID from processes where on disk is equal to 0. And so on disk meaning the binary is not actually on disk, not within our file system. So, but let's go ahead and list the root logins within the last hour. And I did log in as the root user, so running this command, we should see some output here. If I paste that, and sure enough, we do. So we get the username, logged in as root. We see the SSH process that I'm using, right? We get the time, right? And then we also see where I logged in from. So I'm coming from my apartment. This is the external IP address that my ISP has provided me, right? So we see that, hey, the root user was logged in from this IP address, right? And so that's pretty cool. Now let's list some processes that are running on network ports, right? So if I go ahead and copy this guy, we should see a few processes that are running, and sure enough, we do. So we're seeing the process, we're seeing the port that it's listening on, and we also see the address that it's listening on. So for example, I only have, if I quit out of this, and so if I just stop this here, this would be similar to running like a netstat-ltpnd. We list these out. We see that the master process is listening, and we also see my SSH connection, right? So we see that correspond to what we see in the table above, and we're using Osquery to do that, right? So I could run this command, run this statement, on a set interval, maybe every hour or something, to see if all of a sudden, hey, some new process started up that is listening on a port that we haven't approved. So maybe all of a sudden one of our servers has become compromised and is listening on a random port like 8000 or something, it's listening for connections from a command and control server that is owned by an attacker, right? So it's listening for new commands to be ran, right? So let me go ahead and go back into this, and we can list out a few more. Again, there's probably a cleaner way to exit out of the Osquery CLI rather than just control-Cing out of it. So Let me grab it and kill it again. So I'll kill -9 1497. And then run my OS query again and get back to my virtual database. So let's load kernel modules. So again, it's just a simple select statement. If I run that, then we list out all of our kernel modules that are installed on this operating system. I also have, so to find processes running on port 8080, if I were to do this, I wouldn't have anything because I don't have anything running on port 8080, but if I were to do, for example, port 22, I'll see my SSH connections. So we say select process ID from listening ports where port is equal to 22. And you can see we output our process ID. And if we go up to our previous, where we retrieved all services that are listening on a port, right, we see the process ID being the same, 1099, and scrolling down, 1099, and sure enough that it was listening on port 22. Let's see who's logged into the system. So let's dump everything from logged in users. So if I dump all logged in users, we see some like operating system users, but then we also see the user, right? And that user being root. If I, were to have a please subscribe user, right, that was logged in, that would also be detailed here as well. And again, we see where I established that SSH connection from, right? Let's see what Python packages are installed on a given server, right? And again, we can detail that out here by just running a simple SQL statement, right? From a operations perspective, let's get a little more complex. Let's find the top 5 most CPU intensive processes. So if we copy this whole statement here, paste that in, and now we're seeing top processes that are consuming the most CPU, right? So that'd be another good thing. If all of a sudden like a crypto miner or something got onto a box on one of your servers, right? That's probably the main goal of that type of malware is to hijack your CPU to mine for cryptocurrencies, right? And so that would be detailed out here. So all of a sudden, if this crypto miner process, was hogging up all of your CPU, that would be detailed within this table here, right? So, and let's just look at a few more. Select all of the disks that are actually unencrypted, right? So I could see if there's anything unencrypted. And sure enough, based on this demo box that I have, let me run that again to make it a little prettier for you guys. We see that my disk mount here is not encrypted, right? And so we can see that let me make this bigger. We see my encrypted status is not encrypted, right? So from a compliance perspective, I could run this on a box and make sure all of my boxes are up to my compliance standards, right? And make the appropriate encryption on a specific disk as needed, right? And Osquery gives us a good way to view that. That's something. So we're now introducing more data collection that the Wazoo agent can't provide, right? And we're doing that with this Osquery tool, right? And so, but of course, I don't want to have to log on to all of my boxes and run these queries manually, right? We need this to scale. And to do that, Osquery actually has a daemon that we can run and will allow us to run these commands at set intervals, right? And these commands could be the ones that I have, just detailed down below to get you guys started, or you can create your own that will look for particular events that you and your team want to be alerted on. And so to do so, we can actually run Osquery as a service, right? So, and I can do that with the Osquery D, which will run it as a daemon, right? And so let me go ahead and kill my CLI session and let me run or let me enable Osquery to run as a daemon. So we've created that, but we also, before starting it, we need to set up the osquery.conf file. And what this will be, so if I go into, I think I'm already in it. Yeah, it's etc osquery. If I list this out, we see we don't have anything. So I'll create this osquery.conf file. Oh, damn it. Nano got me again. I was doing so well. Maybe because I just got back from vacation, so I'm still in that vacation mindset, I guess. It slipped out. So let me copy this, and I will paste it within this osquery.conf. And so what we're doing is we're enabling our plugins. So that's fine. I'm setting my time zone, and here I'm just using UTC. I'm done setting that to true. And here you see some of our SQL statements are set to run on a set interval. So let's just say, for example, I want to add, let's do the root one. Let's add the root login within the last hour. So what I can do is just copy the syntax of one of these. And I will paste this guy in, and I'll give it a description. So I'll just say root underscore logins. And now I'll set my query. And this query will be the query that we actually ran within the Osquery CLI. So I can copy this guy. And you want to make sure you include it between the double quotes here. So let's just remove all that, paste that in. Let me clean this up a little bit, so it's a little easier to read. Okay, that looks good. Our interval is 900, so this would be 900 seconds. Let me just say every 10 seconds. And then I'll set a description. I'll say root login within the last hour. All right, and then Osquery also comes bundled with packs. So, and Osquery also comes bundled with packs. So these packs are composed of queries that fit a particular group, right? So if I look at this incident response pack group and open up this file, so I'll exit, save this guy, open up this file here, we see similar to what we had within our schedule block, right? It's just these are now categorized with their, these are just categorized and come pre-bundled with Osquery. So you don't have to write all of your own. The people behind Osquery within their GitHub provide these packs that will help get people started and run kind of basic queries that, well, like for example, this IP tables run. Select all from IP tables. So if you have any IP tables rules configured, or maybe, maybe you then use a good use case for this would be to see all of a sudden a new IP tables rule was added that maybe like allows an SSH login from any IP address, right? So say you have you want to have your boxes really locked down, and you configure local firewall rules using IP tables to only allow SSH connections from a particular IP address, and then all of a sudden a new rule pops up that says that allows SSH logins from any IP address. So this would be a good query that would alert you on that, right? If all of a sudden you saw a new rule added, you would then, that would be abnormal, and you could take appropriate action to see, why was this rule added? Maybe the box is compromised, or maybe a operations user just forgot to clean something up, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of pre-bundled packs that will help get you started. And so that looks good. All right, and we will go ahead and start the Osquery daemon. Let me make sure it started up correctly. Error parsing config. Okay, let's see if I wonder if it doesn't like our double quotes within the double quotes here. Let me see if I add a single quote, see what happens. Let me run a restart. Oh. Run a status, and yeah, that looks better. All right, so now we should be able to start to tail the log files. So if I go into var log Osquery and run an ls, we should see, so we have an Osquery d results.log. Let's go ahead and tail this guy and see if there's anything in there. So if I tail that out, we see our queries are actually running, right? And our set intervals are now being acknowledged by the Osquery daemon. That 10 is actually not 10 seconds, but 10 minutes. So this interval here for our root logins within the last hour, this is actually 10 minutes and not 10 seconds. So my apologies on that one. And so these intervals are set to run. This is a minute time frame, right? And so if we go back into this results file, we'll see our output of our query, right, that we want to run. So we can see it ran the query root logins. So if I go back to that conf, we named it root logins, right? And then we get all of our metadata around that query. So we get the host, and it reflects what we saw within our table when we were running via the CLI command. So we see the host that logged in. Again, this is the external IP address that I have from my apartment. We see the username was root, and the action added being it added it to the log file that we're tailing here, right? So this is awesome. So we now get this output. So we now get our queries being ran automatically for us, and it's also because we have specified the packs as well, it'll also run those SQL statements that are in there as well, and now those are being ran automatically on a set interval for us rather than us having to manually log on to the box and run. So as you can see, the pack Osquery monitoring Osquery info one just ran, and we get all the metadata around that as well. So now our servers are running these SQL statements for us, and these SQL statements can be whatever we want. You know, we could create our own pack file, right? So maybe I have SQL statements I want to run for Linux servers and then for Windows servers, and I create my own linux.conf pack and a windows.conf pack and depending on the server that I'm deploying this on and wanting to monitor, will receive the appropriate pack, right? And so I could do that, and I could organize a little bit better by using these packs, or I can just write my own ad hoc ones, but have these ran on set intervals. And in the next video, I'm going to show you guys how we can get these to Wazoo and have Wazoo actually run this daemon service for us, and make our lives even more easier. And then we can have Wazoo rules trigger if, you know, for example, all of a sudden a root user logs in, right? If all of a sudden Osquery saw a root user log in, it would then trigger a Wazoo rule appropriately. Or maybe going back to the IP tables example, we see that a new IP tables rule has been added from one of our queries, and then the Wazoo agent then detects that. The Wazoo manager then compares that against a rule set, sees that, hey, an IP tables rule was added, and then alerts us accordingly. So we can automate that alerting for us using Wazoo, and in the next video we will go ahead and jump into that. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and I will see you there.